So, welcome everybody. This is one time when I know you wouldn't rather all be wandering around outside. So I'm Mark Mahaly, I'm the dean, and it's going to be my great pleasure to introduce Paulette Brown, who happens to be, among all the other wonderful things she is, president of the American Bar Association. And I want to talk about that for a minute, but also I just want to, because Ms. Brown is here, we also have Jennifer Emmons Butler here, who's the, Jennifer, you want to stand up for a minute? Jennifer? Jennifer, as you might gather, is one of ours, but also is president of the Vermont Bar Association, which is a unique and wonderful organization. And we have also here today Bob Paolini and Teresa Corsoni. Did I pronounce it right? Is it Corsone? Close. Stand up, please. Would you guys stand up? Thank you. Bob is the executive director of the VBA, and Janet, my condolences, is the incoming director of the VBA. And also later this afternoon, all of you who have any interest at all in environmental law, there will be a panel with Ms. Brown on the panel, and also international law. What did I? All right, international law. Thank you. One of the panelists on that will be Ingrid Bruson Hall. Also, Ingrid, you want to stand up? And Teresa Ray, who will be on the panel as well. Not Teresa, I'm sorry, Lisa Ray, who will be on the panel as well. And I urge you to come at 2 o'clock. That panel will be in Yates. And it's on careers in international law. At 2:30? Has anything other mistakes I've made yet? Yeah, okay, but it's nice that, there's people to help me out. So why is it important that Paulette Brown is here? We were talking about this earlier. When I was in law school, I knew the American Bar Association existed, but I had absolutely no understanding at all of what it does or its importance, or much less its importance to me. And now what I realize, and a lot of us realize, is that it's core to us. It's an extremely important body. First of all, of course, it's important to us as a law school because unlike all the other types of schools in the country where there are regional accreditors, so the Department of Education delegates to regional accreditors the job of accrediting master's programs. Our accreditor, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, will be on campus. In fact, starting next weekend and through the first few days of the week, examining us because of our master's programs. But with respect to law, there's only one accreditor nationwide, and that is a council of the American Bar Association. So it's important because of that. It's also important for the simple reason that the law is in crisis. The whole idea of what it means to be a lawyer, how we provide access to justice for poor people and for the middle class in the United States is really up for discussion because it's not working as well as it should. Issues of access to the law for women and minorities are really in the forefront. What the practice of law will be. Will lawyers be replaced by kiosks at Walmart? What does the future look like? When I graduated from law school, these issues were not anywhere near. They weren't on the horizon, or with respect to women and minorities, they were just sort of on the horizon. So these issues about the future of our profession are front and center, And there is one organization that speaks with one voice nationally on this, and it's the American Bar Association. For those of you who are students, when I was your age, I was not a joiner. It did never occurred to me to become a member of the ABA or a member of my bar association because they were them. You know, they were the authority figure. I had no interest in being part of them. It was a mistake. It's important to become part of these organizations and get to know people and understand what they do and then contribute. And just so you know, membership, Ms. Brown just informed me, which I should have known, I'm ashamed to say I didn't, membership for students in the ABA is free, and membership in the ABA is, the membership fee is waived for the first year out of law school. So I urge you to join the ABA. Begin to make your voice heard. Shane, one of your number is the ABA, is the student delegate. There's a student delegate from every law school. Shane, you want to stand up? So there's a delegate to the ABA from every law school. The law school delegates get together. They take positions on issues which are either followed or ignored by the bar, but they do it. So Paulette Brown. Paulette Brown is an interesting and unusual individual. She is, of course, president of the ABA, and has had a whole variety of leadership positions in the ABA. She's been for more than almost 2 decades, well, more than a decade, was ABA House of Delegates. She was in the House of Delegates. She was a former member of the ABA Board of Governors. And if you read her bio on the web, I think for the students, it's worth reading her bio on the web. And the reason is, I'm not going to read them all. What you'll see is here is a person who involved herself in the ABA at a very, very early on in her career. And because of that, has become influential because of who she is. And because of her early involvement, she has just had one position after another inside of the ABA. And it's really worth thinking about you're doing that. You're becoming part of the ABA. She does practice law. She's a commercial lawyer. She asserts to me that she still somehow, despite her pledge to be in 50 states and her appearance here, and she actually does have clients who I think, even as we've been talking, have been trying to get her attention on her cell phone. She's a really renowned commercial practitioner. She's been named one of the 50 most influential minority lawyers in America, and the U.S. News labeled her one of the best lawyers in America in the area of commercial litigation. And we all know that we are the beneficiary of U.S. News and World Report rankings. And so since they're right about us, for whatever reason, they must be right about her. So, Ms. Brown, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming, and please come and talk to us and answer questions afterwards. Thank you. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I also have to thank 2 other people for causing me to be in this glorious state. And that is Ingrid, who was mentioned before, and it ties directly into the section on international law, and Dean Jackson. Oh, there you are, who I met in Atlanta this past fall. And so what Ingrid did was she just put the icing on the cake and was a little more forceful in having me to come here. But I am really happy to be here. I see a lot of snow. You all kept saying that we're sorry there's no snow. We're sorry there's no snow. You know, I'm not sad that there's no snow. But now I do see that there is snow. Outside right now. But, you know, it's really, there's so many things that I can say about what I didn't imagine when I came to Vermont Law School. some things that I absolutely did not expect. I did not expect your campus to look the way it does. I did not expect to get a 95-minute tour of Vermont last night, unexpectedly, from the person who was driving me didn't know where they were going. But it's good because it really gave me, and he also said, which I thought was really interesting, I said, where in Vermont are we? He said, we're at the southern end of Vermont. And I'm like, that can't be true. But it explains why we were lost. Then the other thing, I'm walking down the hall today with the dean and with Ingrid, and this woman approaches me, and she comes and whispers in my ear, and I just absolutely cannot believe it. So Sherry, first-year law student, I haven't seen since 1973. Yeah, I'm telling you. I can't. But she's younger than I am because I graduated in 73. She was still in college. But, I can't. Who would think that I would come to Vermont at the law school and run into someone who not only had I not seen since 73, but we're in the same sorority. Okay, it's just amazing. So I can't tell you that I'm happy to be here for so many reasons. And I didn't confess this, but, as I'm looking around and I'm looking at the focus on environmental law that you have, I have, in the 40 years that I've been practicing, I never had a desire to go back to school. And listening and looking at all that you do here, just something, I don't know whether I was having temporary insanity or what, but, something started coming over me that made me want, but do I want an LLM in environmental law? I don't know. And I promise you, I have visited, I can't tell you, countless law schools. And this is the honest truth. I have never, ever said this to anyone before. And we'll see tomorrow whether I'm suffering from temporary insanity. But it's really, it's a beautiful state, and there's certain things, and I'm way off topic, I have to tell you. But there's certain things that I noticed about the students here and the environment that you probably don't know because it comes naturally to you. But people stopped and held the door when you were coming. People said hello when you were here. I mean, it was just amazing. And so, as somebody born and raised in Baltimore, we always greeted people when we saw them. And if you didn't, my father's famous words were, if you didn't say good morning, it's like, did I sleep with you last night? So anyway. So, it's just, and so it's like, we were accustomed to saying good morning, coming from Baltimore. So I am, you probably know my age. All my mail now that I get is about Medicare. But so it's something that's ingrained in me. And I have to tell you that, even though I'm deviating really from what I'm supposed to be here to talk about, and you can ask me the questions later, it's just really such a thrill to be here. Really, thank you for inviting me, really. And to have the bar leaders here, who I'll see later this week, in Chicago. But, it's so different. When I've been to New England many times, and I've been to Vermont several times, but it is southern Vermont mostly that I've been to. And usually when you talk about New England, you're talking about Boston, where I've been, so many times. But, it's been quite an experience for me as president of the ABA to be able to visit so many places where, quite frankly, I probably would not have gone. And to meet so many wonderful people like I've met in Vermont. In particular, as I mentioned before, what you do here, the kind of work that you do here, I've also never been to a law school that just focused so intensely on an area that is so important to our society and to the rule of law and to access to justice, and how all of these things tie in. Even though your focus is environmental and energy and so forth, it really ties into so many aspects of the access to justice. And, so many people, and brings attention to the fact that so many people don't have access to justice, that you're really on the ground trying to really effectuate change and make a difference in the world in which we live. We are supposed to be lawyers, and you are future lawyers who we have an obligation to maintain the rule of law and to ensure that there is access to justice. And if there is no access to justice, we cannot really maintain or advance the rule of law. They go hand in hand. That is our job as lawyers, and it is your job as budding lawyers to ensure that. So, and even if you don't choose the area of law of environmental law or something of that sort, all of you can have an impact on society and what it is that we do. So one of the things that I know that was asked about me, some of the challenges that we face to the justice system, and probably all of you know that more than half of all young people believe that the justice system is not fair. And someone, when I mentioned that today, someone who's not a lawyer said, well, of course they think that because it's not. But, it's as I've traveled around the world, which I also had an opportunity to do, I find that people really still admire our system of democracy and of justice. And we're still probably the best at what it is that we do, but that's not reason that we should not have a lot of major improvements. We're also a country that has the highest incarceration rate of any free society. And so, what has prompted that? How do we get to that point? And what do we do as lawyers and law students to change that dynamic and change the negative professions of the legal negative impression of the legal profession? There's a lot that we can do both individually and collectively. And first we have to think about what are the barriers? Why do we have this perception? And why there seems to be an imbalance in the justice system? Why are some people incarcerated while others are not? And why are some people given leniency when others are not? And I think that some of it has to do with implicit bias. Everybody familiar with the term implicit bias? I see noddings of the heads. Yes. So you know that all of us have them, right? None of us are exempt from having them. And so I have mine. And my sister, many years ago, must be 20 years ago, before people were talking about diversity and inclusion and implicit bias, all those things, she told me I was prejudiced against a certain group of people. It has nothing to do with race or gender or anything like that. But she told me that for years, and I denied it. And then I learned about the implicit association test. Because when I did training for my firm, I said that everybody had to take at least 3 of them. And so I took one that I had been accused of, and my sister was slightly right. So what that has caused me to do is I have accepted the fact that I have this implicit bias. And so what I do, because what happens is if you don't know that you have them, you can engage in behaviors that are not helpful, that are negative, that cause you to make decisions that you would not otherwise make if you knew and understood that you had this bias. And so I think that that is what has happened a lot in the justice system, both civilly and criminally, and also in the area in which you practice or which the school focuses on, and that is the environmental aspect. So, as we think about how the world is evolving and the changes that are occurring in our environment and who is going to be most impacted by it. And it's the people who have the least. They're the poorest people, the communities of color. They will be impacted more by the adverse changes in climate and the adverse otherwise environmental conditions that exist in the country. And so Why aren't people focusing more on these communities? Because we don't really think about it as much. So we have to be intentional in all it is that we do. We can't just say things will happen naturally or in due course. They won't. Just as we have, there have had to been affirmative fights or actions to change any other laws that granted people rights, the same has to happen in the environmental space as well. So we have to do all that we can. So, not thinking so much about the environmental space, but just thinking about diversity and inclusion in our profession, and as, becoming president of the American Bar Association, when I thought about it, and I thought about the fact that I would be the first woman of color in the ABA's 137-year history to be president of the American Bar Association. And I'm like, what a great opportunity. But also, I said, this carries a big responsibility because, like it or not, there will be different expectations of me. And so I said, what can I do? Well, I thought about three major things that I could do, and probably much to the chagrin of the ABA staff and people who were working closely with me, my three things, they started to form tentacles. And so they weren't three things anymore. So I decided to focus on our members because we are a voluntary, membership-driven organization. And so what could we do to make our members feel like they have value with their membership? And so we created something called ABA Every Day. Anybody use it? Any members of the ABA? Have you ever used ABA Every Day? Come on. So there's a free member benefit every single day with the ABA. Every day, if you are a member, you can click on, and it's abaeveryday.org or something like that. And also, if you get the ABA Journal, in the back of the ABA Journal, it lists all the free benefit every single day of the month. So you can get a free benefit. It can be a chapter in a book. It can be a podcast. It can be a discount on Hertz rental cars. But there's a free benefit every day if you're a member of the ABA. So, and then I wanted to, I had a young lady to say to me from Iowa, how does a person from Iowa ever get to be active in the ABA? And I thought nobody should ever have to ask that question. And so I decided that maybe we'll have something called Main Street ABA. So I actually stayed on Main Street last night in Vermont, but it's really to bring the ABA to the members and to people who would be members. And so I started off by saying I wanted to visit 2 states a month, and people thought I was crazy for saying, how are you going to do that? But I'm like, and then I discovered visiting 2 states a month is really easy. So I got on this roll, and so now my goal is to visit all 50 states before my term is over in August. And so I am on track to do that. And I have 1 state that has not been scheduled. I ordinarily would not come to Vermont in the middle of winter. But there are states that may be even colder. So I've scheduled them for June and July, like Alaska and North Dakota and South Dakota and those states. But, what I've found, and the idea is not to do what I call a flyby. Just pop in and then pop back out. So it gives me an opportunity like I had today to actually walk around your campus and to meet with some of the student leaders and to then have a lunch and then to do this and then to be on a program and then to go to a school later on today in Vermont. And I think the school was substituted because one of the things I like to do is visit a Boys and Girls Club wherever I go, because I think it's never too early to start building the pipeline to our profession. And it's really a pipeline so that they can continue their education, but I am unashamedly selfish. I want them to go to law school. I want them to become lawyers because we still have the most noble profession that there is, and don't ever let anybody tell you, law students, that that is not true, because it is true. And in fact, I would not go out so far on a limb, but there is not much that anybody can do without a lawyer. Almost everything we do in our daily lives is impacted by the law. Almost everything. And so even if you want to do something other than be a lawyer, you're going to still need a lawyer. So so people really should stop talking badly about lawyers. But so I wanted to meet as many people and touch as many people, let them know that the ABA is there for them. And I will tell you that even though I'm doing this, I'm having a really good time. It has really been great. And so we've created a map that's on the website of the United States, and you can click on it to see where I've been and where I'm going, and there are pictures that go along with it. So when I leave here, you can click on Vermont, and you can see some of the pictures. We got to take some, though. We can click on Vermont, and others will from around the country will see that, oh, she went to Vermont and had a good time. And I may take some pictures of the snow outside. But the other thing that I wanted to focus on, and some asked me, why are you doing that? Just because you're the first woman of color does not mean that you have to spend your time on diversity and inclusion. And I said, well, if I don't, who will? And so, when we still are talking about the same numbers, only about 20% women are equity partners in law firms. We've been talking about this for a long time. Well, it's gone up a couple of percentages, but not enough. Not in terms of representation of women who are graduating from law school. And the numbers with regard to women of color are even lower. They're less than 2% women of color who are equity partners in law firms. So we need to change that dynamic. And again, we need to build the pipeline, and we need to stop talking about the same statistics and how women are treated and how people of color are treated, how members of LGBT the community, how they're treated, how people with disabilities are treated. And so we have formed a commission. It's called Diversity and Inclusion 360, where we have gathered, it seems like that there should be more people on the commission, but there are only about 12 or 14 people on the commission. They're doing double and triple duty. But we have 4 working groups. One is to work with the pipeline and not just waiting until they're in college or waiting until they're in law school to ensure that we have lawyers. We are starting from kindergarten. Because like I said, I don't think it's ever too young, because we got to make sure children stay in school in the first place. There'll be nothing to talk about once they're eligible to be in law school if they've never finished high school. So we're looking at 3 categories, kindergarten through 12, college, and then law school through bar passage. And we're looking at a number of different programs that already exist, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel, right? And so we have looked at, and so with regard especially kindergarten through 12th grade, there's so many good programs that exist in the country that they can be replicated in other jurisdictions. So we want people to be able to have a resource that they can come to, that they can use in their particular area. There's also, other programs that law students have started because there's so many children being subjected to the juvenile justice system for things. When I was in school, they would just send you to the principal's office and call your parents, which you would be a lot more afraid of than anything else. But they're calling the police more and more frequently. And so you've got all these people who they call resource officers in the schools, and the more schools that have resource officers, the more inclined they are to refer children to the police, including 5-year-olds. It's just really, yes, there's a child who had an outburst about a jelly bean counting contest, and they took her to the office. They called the police. They called her mother. After they called the police, the mother came immediately, but they still kept this 5-year-old 3 hours in the back of the police car, holding a 5-year-old. So this is what's going on in the public schools. So, people being expelled because one young man was suspended. He was 7 years old because he chewed his Pop-Tart in the shape of a gun. So he was suspended from school. So you have all of these things going on. So if these kids are being affected in this way and they have a record, how are they ever going to get to the fitness and character portion to get their license? So we can't start thinking about it that late. We have to start thinking about it at a very young age to make sure that they get through and don't have these unnecessary records. So we're looking at colleges. You know, some colleges are going through the community college process, and there's a program in California that has been extremely successful in creating a pathway to law school. And we're also looking at the military, which is one of the most diverse organizations, whatever we think of the military. It's still one of the most diverse groups in the United States, and looking at that as a means to increase the pipeline. And we've talked to all the judge advocate generals in all the branches of the military, and to see how we can promote that. And we're also looking internally at the ABA, because how can we go out and tell people what it is that they should do if we don't have our own house in order? So we're looking at all of the different entities and seeing what they're doing from a diversity and inclusion perspective, and creating guidelines so that we can make sure that women and other people participate in CLEs, that you don't have all of one kind of individual on CLEs anymore, and just looking at all the internal operations of the ABA to make sure that we're doing all that we can from that standpoint, to make sure everybody is included. And what I'd like to explain to people on a regular basis is that when we talk about including people, we're not talking about excluding anyone. We're talking about bringing in people who otherwise have not been included into the mainstream and incorporating them with those people who are already there. We're not trying to put anybody out. We're adding seats to the table. So, you know, we really want people to have a clear understanding of that. So people looked at me sideways when I said that of my appointments, and I had about 800 appointments, 52% were women, and I could see some sideways looking. I told them not to worry, because I could only appoint 1/3 of the people. So there were still plenty of other people on all of the various other committees. So, but you know, the thing is that what they don't count young lawyers, and I think that young lawyers, it's important to involve them, and you shouldn't, when you become young lawyers, law students, don't let people say, well, you have to pay your dues first. Well, how do you get to pay your dues if you can't be involved? So I had 4 young lawyers out of 12 on my appointments committee. So I can assure you that every committee had a young lawyer appointed to it. So, and I just can't subscribe to that, because at some point you've got to be able to obtain knowledge, just like I did as a young lawyer. So we can't talk about people having to pay their dues before they can be appointed to something. And we had 46% diverse people appointed to various committees, and that included people of color, included people with disabilities, included members of LGBT groups. And the one thing, so we have a commission called SOGI, which is the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Commission. And one of the things, because diversity means even if you have that kind of committee and you have a Hispanic committee, that does not mean you put all Hispanics on the Hispanic Commission. That doesn't mean you put all members of LGBT groups on the SOGI Commission. Diversity means and inclusion means exactly what it says. You have to have different people who have different thoughts, a variety of thoughts. So you mix it up, and you don't have even those committees. It can't be all the same. So, you know, we tried to do that as well. So the other two things the commission is doing is we have an implicit bias working group. So we are creating training materials for judges, prosecutors, and public defenders on implicit bias. And I think that prosecutors have more power in the justice system than almost anyone. Sometimes they have more power than the judges, because people can't get to a judge without the prosecutor, because the prosecutor determines how a person's going to be charged. So we're creating videos, 10-minute videos, to explain implicit bias and the impact that it can have. And then we're creating training materials to go along with it. I've asked Microsoft to also create an app for me, so that judges, prosecutors, anybody can use this app to learn more about bias and diversity and inclusion. So we finished the judges video, and it's really powerful because in addition to having 3 experts, we have 3 judges on the video who are actually talking about their implicit bias. So it's very powerful. And then we have an economic working group that is trying to work on ways that we can empower economically more women, more people of color, more members of LGBT groups, et cetera. So we're working on those 4 things within the ABA. So we want people to really understand that it is something that the American Bar Association is working on, that we care about how people perceive the justice system and what it is that we can do to improve us, all of us one at a time, and in our various organizations, in our bar associations, and our student government organizations. And what I'm so pleased about is that when I met with some of the student leaders earlier today, double and triple and quadruple duty that the law students are doing. It's just absolutely amazing. So for me to stand here and talk about what it is you should be doing, not so much. I think that what I'd like to do is to take what you're doing and try and see if I can replicate that in some other places. One of the good things is that, students are not as in tune as to what role they can play, because some of them think that they're mere students. Nobody is a mere anything. Everybody is significant, and I think that that's one of the things that we have to get across. And it happens when I visit Boys and Girls Club, because law students and or young lawyers always go with me, and they've never had the experience of going to a Boys and Girls Club. And I will tell you that of the 26 Boys and Girls Clubs that I've been to, at least 23 of them, there is a continuing relationship between the law students and the young lawyers who have visited. They've never been to a club like this. They're so inspired by the young people who ask such interesting questions. And we have to make sure that curiosity and all of that is promoted. I like to tell the story about the 7-year-old in New Orleans who asked the question, what if you get a case that you don't believe in? I thought that was really a deep question for a 7-year-old to ask. And so I punted to the young lawyer to answer the question. and as she was explaining, he got real close up to her. And he was looking at her like this, almost as if to say, you better tell me the right answer. But he was just so curious, and so we have to continue to inspire young people. And I am so pleased and proud that the young people are taking up the mantle and they're doing this. They're staying involved in these young people's lives. And so, I can tell you about all the different programs that the ABA has, and I will tell you, without telling an untruth, that there is something for everybody in the ABA. And there's so many things that the ABA does. Yes, I drank the Kool-Aid. There's so many things that the ABA does for so many people, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, that the general public does not know about, that even other lawyers don't know about, the things that we advocate for. We have ABA Day that I'll see you several more times in the next several weeks. That we advocate for, like funding for legal services, like we're advocating this year for criminal justice reform, and we have lobbied for the accrual, not to do the accrual accounting system where you tax lawyers before they get paid, as though we get paid as soon as people come in. Wouldn't that be nice? But there's so many things that people don't realize what it is that we do. We vet all of the judges who are nominated by the president for the federal judiciary, and we will be vetting again the nominee, whoever the president nominates for the Supreme Court. We take the position, we don't take any political sides ever, but we certainly want the Senate to act on whatever nomination that is put forth. So we do. Politics don't belong in this process. The Constitution has requirements, and I would even think that Justice Scalia, who was a strict constitutionalist, would agree that the Constitution requires that there be a nomination and that the Senate act on it. So we, strongly encourage that. We do a number of different things for different groups of people. And as I mentioned, I've had great opportunities during my career. Some things I never thought that I would ever get to do, from a girl coming from Baltimore whose parents didn't go to college, whose siblings didn't go to college, and I know that if this wonderful thing has happened to me being president of the ABA, that anything is possible. And so I just strongly encourage you to continue to do all of the great things that you've been doing. This is a great law school from what I can see. And I have to think about how this can tie into international law, which I have to tell you that the section of international law has abducted me. I think they now have property rights to me, but it is a great section. I did not belong to it before I got to know them, and I've requested that I be the Board of Governors liaison to them for next year. So, the ABA, it's not just that section. I've been active in the litigation section and the labor and employment section. All great sections. There's some place for each of you. And I would recommend that you try different ones out to see what it is you like. I'm excited to be here and thinking about where I go next, in addition to practicing law, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. Hope that you will have long and productive lives in the legal profession, and that when you hear naysayers talk about the legal profession and what it does not do, please remind them that lawyers provide more pro bono service than any other profession. Remind them that when we had, during National Pro Bono Week, when we had our ABA and Justice for All and ABA Day of Service, tens of thousands of lawyers donated their time. That we had over 1,000 events registered for this one day, and that people from other countries were so excited about what the lawyers in the United States were doing. We had 6 other countries participate in our day of service, including China. So, tell them that you are a proud student or you are a proud lawyer, because we do great things and we help people. And without lawyers, we cannot exist, we cannot maintain a democracy, and we can have no rule of law without lawyers. This is a great and honorable profession. Encourage other people to join it. We need all of you. So I thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you again for allowing me to be here. And if there are any questions, maybe I'll answer, maybe I won't. Thank you.
So I'm going to exercise the right to ask the first question. But then, here she is. Does she seem like a shrinking violet to you? So here's your shot. Here's your chance to ask hard questions. So here's my question.
Okay.
As we talked about, it's just a softball, don't
okay.
worry. No. So earlier, we talked about here in Vermont, there are very few lawyers in the Vermont legislature. And in fact, when it was budget cutting time, which it's been for a while, one of the first things to get cut was the law library. And so we picked up, Cynthia and the other law librarians picked up the law library. And it is really part of a larger issue here, which is just a sense of that there really isn't, the idea of the role of lawyers really isn't very positively looked at in the legislature, which is a great legislature in many other respects, and as legislatures go, pretty good. So what's your perception of the relationship between the ABA and Congress, and how Congress looks at the ABA? How are you really regarded when you go and testify? Do people pay attention to what you have to say? That's my question.
So I have not personally testified. Basically, the people who generally testify are when you have now people placed, especially in the Supreme Court, we will have probably the chair of the Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary to testify. The ABA, fortunately, is still recognized as the vetter of federal court judges. So that's been happening since 1955. It only stopped for a short period of time. But still, we are considered, and they look to us. Congress looks to us for a number of different things to be experts on various other matters. So when there's a technical criminal issue, they will call on the ABA to testify. So Congress does listen a lot. Well, we've got a lot of lawyers in Congress, too. But I will tell you that Vermont is not unique in that regard, unfortunately. So there are other states who have actually done more devastating things, especially when it comes to the judiciary. It's almost like they don't regard the judiciary or anything that they do as important, which is why you've seen so many courts that are underfunded. There have been cases where litigants have had to go to court and pay for copies if they want copies of pleadings and so forth, and other devastating things to create limits on what justices can do, and a general breakdown between the three branches of government and the independence that judges should and must have. So, one of the things that I always talk about is, one, how important it is to vote, and not just vote in the big elections, but how important it is to vote in every single election. School board elections, legislative, state government elections, every election is extremely important to vote. And not only that, is that you can't wait until there's an issue that you want resolved, that it's very important to know who your representatives are, visit their offices, let them hear from you, so that when you have something that's really urgent that you need to talk about, they will already know who you are. And so I think that the legal community, the law school community, and I'm sure it already happens with the Vermont Bar, very much in contact with legislators and letting them know what your positions are. But unfortunately, it is a dynamic that is happening in too many states. I got an email from someone in Kansas last night. You should be aware of what our legislators are trying to do to judges right now. So, it is something, and the ABA does voice opinions concerning that. We voice opinions, and it doesn't matter whether you like a particular person, because we have criticized the Obama administration, for example, for some of the immigration policies. If we think that it's against the policy of the ABA, or there's some sort of violation of a person's rights, the ABA will speak about it, whichever side it is. So we do work on that. Yes, sir.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well. Thank you very much for coming to Vermont Law School.
Pleasure.
Since you mentioned that you are going to, or the ABA will vet the next Supreme Court justices, I have a question whether you have any consideration or comments regarding the concept of the Supreme Court as an ivory tower, in that most of the justices, or all of them, have been from largely Ivy League institutions, and whether through your vetting process you'll consider or you'll encourage non-Ivy League graduates.
So the ABA can't consider anyone who's not nominated. And I know that the list is down to about 3 right now, but I also have to say that the Federal Judiciary Committee is independent. I, for example, cannot call them, even though I appointed several of them. I cannot call them and say, this is what you should consider. But But, that process comes from the President of the United States. And we have no control over that, unfortunately. Because I do think that you've got great lawyers who come from a lot of different schools, and simply because you went to an Ivy League school does not make you smarter than someone else, or more capable, I should say, than someone else. Yes, Ms. Sherry.
Thank you for being here. Before I came here, part of my career involved working in environmental justice communities. And I found that there was a great lack of legal expertise or attorneys willing to work with those kinds of communities. What would you recommend to us as attorneys to consider, or law schools to consider, in preparing attorneys to work in those kinds of communities?
So that is a question I asked the Dean, President, this morning. And I know then he pointed to Dean Jackson over here, who is out and about and encouraging students who are affected, who live in the affected communities, to come to a school like Vermont Law School. I think that, as we discussed, it's almost a mano a mano. You got to touch people individually to have them to understand that this is something that should be important to them. And it's not a traditional route for people to take. And it's what happened to me. So when I went to law school, and even when I practiced in a non-traditional area when I first got out in the area of ERISA, because it became effective, I let people tell me that if you're not a litigator, you're not a real lawyer. And so people, we have to explain and share with people as much as we can the fact that there are other areas of law in which you can practice, and this is a real important area, especially now. But I think that it requires direct contact with people and talking directly to people about it. It can't be just sending out materials. You've got to really have face-to-face with people to talk to them about it.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Does the ABA have a current position on encouraging its members or providing funding to provide legal representation for women and children in detention centers in Dilley or Karnes, Texas, also referred to as immigration prisons?
We're there. We're very much there. And I don't know if you're on Twitter, but over the weekend there were a lot of tweets concerning what the ABA is doing on the immigration front, and we're very active in that area. I have personally been to a couple of the detention centers, which I don't really like to even call them detention centers. They remind me more of prisons. But there is a real strong network of volunteers and regular professionals who work in that space. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You briefly mentioned some of the ABA's pro bono services and some of their programs that they have. Excuse me.
Yes.
I was just wondering, could you share some of your thoughts on mandatory pro bono programs and sort of maybe the necessity of them and sort of the legality and how you, and could the ABA be an authoritative source to implement such a program?
So there are different types of mandatory pro bono. So in New Jersey, for example, there's mandatory pro bono for all lawyers. I think it can be more effective because almost all of the cases are criminal or quasi-criminal cases, and there are a lot of people who don't do that. And so people pass off their assignments to young associates and so forth. And I think that there are pro bono opportunities that are available for everybody, and that they don't have to be long-term pro bono activities, which was one of the things we tried to reinforce during that day of service. And so if you go to the ABA website, the pro bono website, you will see all sorts of activities that you can engage in. New York requires all new lawyers to have 50 hours of pro bono. And the interesting thing is that young lawyers and law students are so accustomed to doing pro bono work already that they basically have no objection to it. It was some of us old lawyers who were saying, oh, you can't do that. But for the most part, young lawyers are not objecting. And I will tell you that when I recruited a lot for my firm, two things that young law students always wanted to know about. I don't care what's on your website. I want to know about the real deal about diversity and inclusion at your firm and what kind of pro bono work you do at your firm and whether you get billable out credit for pro bono work. So I don't think that mandatory pro bono regulated by states is such a big deal because the requirements are really small. The only issue that I see is that they try to force you to do work outside of your area of expertise when there's so many other opportunities, pro bono opportunities available. Yes.
I run the tax center here at the law school. I'm a student, and I'm also part of the dispute resolution center, and I see a commonality between these two areas in that there are a lot of mediators and a lot of tax professionals who aren't lawyers who have to regularly deal with the law.
Right.
And they walk a dangerous line very close to giving legal advice. And I was wondering what you saw a lawyer's role as in those particular areas and how the ABA helps out in helping people who need to deal with the law who aren't lawyers to do so effectively.
Why do we call on him? So we have two sections, a tax section, and I think that you should really get involved because they've got a young lawyer program that's fabulous, and a fellowship program. You should really look into that. Are you familiar with it? Okay, good. All right. So, but it is something that we constantly talk about, and we're talking about it more and more. Talking about it in the context of access to justice issues and whether you really need to be a lawyer to provide certain services, and how it can reduce the cost of some services if you have non-lawyers providing it. So it is a subject that is at once really, really touchy, and at the same time people are trying to find innovative ways as to how non-lawyers can be utilized. Now, in a real, I think, specialized area as tax, as a lawyer, I would not want to give advice because I don't know enough about it to really give advice. And so, it's difficult to regulate on an individual basis unless you're in certain states where they are really fierce about regulating the practice of non-lawyers, the unauthorized practice of law. But, it's something that states are seriously looking at, giving people various certifications to do certain things. If they're not lawyers, some have to be monitored by other lawyers, some not. It's an evolving situation that's going on right now, and not just in the areas of alternative dispute resolution and tax, but also in a lot of other areas of the law. And with regard to alternative dispute resolution, that has been an area where you've had non-lawyers for a long time.
I'll take the prerogative of the last question, Paulette.
Okay.
So on diversity and inclusion, and we have discussed this at some length, given that we are still in the neighborhood of 17 to 20%, whether we're talking about general counsel in the Fortune 500, right, equity partners, and the statistics are so much more devastating when we talk about women of color and people of color generally, what moves the needle what are 2 or 3 things that you think will truly make a difference such that we're not having the same conversation with the same statistics in 10, 20 years?
Okay, so first of all decisions come from the top down. So you have to have buy-in from the leaders of whatever organization. People have to understand what are the barriers that are keeping them from doing better. People also, especially because all of this is if you look at it in a business context, which I think that we do, whether we know it or not, and when a business wants a result, if they want a higher sales revenue, they will do all that it takes to get to the result that they want. So if they want a more diverse and inclusive organization, they have the capacity to get to that result. And so I think that unfortunately, even though it's right and it's good for a number of different reasons, I think that for a lot of people we have to put it into an economic perspective. One of the things that I found is that when I talk to people, managing partners, for example, about the fact that Catalyst did a report and it showed that corporate boards that had at least 3 women had an increase. They were 84% more profitable in their sales than boards that did not. And somebody came and asked me, "Is that really true?" Yes, it is really true. And so, a lot of it, unfortunately, will be driven by economics, because people will come to the realization that, that as the demographics change in this country, that more people will have to be included. Otherwise, you will have true economic failure. The other thing is that, it goes back to the point where people think that inclusion means exclusion. And so nobody wants to be left out. And, there is in some instances a sense of entitlement that we have to get over. We need more people who truly believe in diversity and inclusion, not just for them to believe in it, but for them to speak up and speak out when they see that it's not happening, or when they see people creating barriers for other people to succeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.